If you want people to notice you, try being useful.
The conference room buzzed with voices as Lyle Harper stood at the front, holding up the quarterly report. My quarterly report. The one I'd spent 3 months building from scratch. He smiled at everyone except me. "I want to thank the team who made this possible," he said, scanning faces. My heart pounded as he listed names: Marcy, Daniel, Alyssa, but never mine. Someone actually nudged me backward, whispering, "Give the important people some space." I stood frozen, invisible in a room full of co-workers. Lyle's eyes finally landed on me.
If you want people to notice you, try being useful.
If you want people to notice you, Brielle, try being useful. The room went silent. Then someone laughed. My name is Brielle Morgan, and until that moment, I thought I was just imagining things. For 3 years at Summit Consulting Group, I'd been the person nobody saw. I arrived early, stayed late, fixed problems nobody else could solve, and watched others take credit for my work. I was good at my job, better than most, but being quiet and competent made me wallpaper. Meetings happened around me like I wasn't there. Emails went unanswered. My ideas were ignored until someone louder repeated them. I told myself it was normal office politics. But standing in that conference room, publicly humiliated, I realized something darker. They didn't just overlook me. They erased me on purpose. I walked back to my desk in silence. My hands shook as I sat down. Around me, the office celebrated. Marcy high-fived Daniel. Alyssa posed for photos with the printed report, the report I'd created. Nobody looked at me, not once. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen, but the words blurred. My chest felt tight. For 3 years, I'd swallowed this treatment, believing hard work would eventually pay off. I was wrong. These people didn't care about competence. They cared about visibility, and I had none. But as I sat there, something shifted inside me. A quiet, dangerous thought formed. If they can't see me, I can do anything. That evening, I sat alone in a corner cafe 3 blocks from the office. Rain tapped against the window. I pulled out a fresh notebook and stared at the blank first page. My hand moved almost automatically, writing 3 words, "What they ignore." I paused, then added, "I'll master." For the next 2 hours, I mapped everything. Company weaknesses, client complaints I'd overheard, revenue gaps nobody seemed to notice, inefficiencies Lyle dismissed when I tried to mention them. I wrote until my hand cramped. Then I saw it, a pattern buried in my notes. Our biggest client, Harper Tech Solutions, wasn't just unhappy. They were quietly preparing to leave. And I knew exactly why. The next morning, I arrived at 6:45 a.m., earlier than usual. The office was empty except for the hum of computers and the cleaning crew vacuuming the executive floor. I made coffee and settled at my desk, reviewing old emails. Then I heard voices, Lyle and Marcy, talking in low, urgent tones near the copy room. I froze. "If we lose Harper Tech, we're finished," Marcy hissed. "That's 40% of our revenue." Lyle cursed under his breath. "Their renewal meeting is in 6 weeks. We need a miracle." I stayed perfectly still, hidden behind my monitor. They walked past without noticing me. When their footsteps faded, I exhaled slowly. A miracle. They needed a miracle, and I had one. I spent the weekend building something nobody asked me to create. A complete consulting framework designed specifically for Harper Tech's problems. I knew their pain points because I'd handled their account data for months. Tedious work Lyle delegated to me without a second thought. I analyzed workflow bottlenecks, communication failures, and budget inefficiencies. Everything was clean, legal, and entirely my own work. By Sunday night, I had 40 slides of pure strategy. It wasn't theft, it was expertise. Monday morning, I saved the file to my personal cloud and returned to the office. Daniel walked past my desk, barely glancing at me. "Still here," he muttered. "I forgot you existed." I smiled quietly. Perfect. 2 days later, I overheard something that changed everything. I was in the break room, making tea, when Alyssa and Marcy walked in, laughing. Honestly, Brielle could disappear for weeks and nobody would notice, Alyssa said, pouring coffee. Marcy snorted. She's like office furniture, functional but forgettable. They didn't see me standing 3 feet away, hidden by the open refrigerator door. The words stung, but I didn't flinch. I let them laugh. Then my phone buzzed. A calendar notification. Harper Tech had scheduled a status call for Friday. Attendees: Lyle, Marcy, Daniel, and relevant team members. My name wasn't listed, but I'd be there anyway. Because I always was. Friday's call was tense. I sat in the back corner of the conference room, laptop open but muted. Lyle led the discussion, stammering through vague updates. Harper Tech's account manager, Lauren Cross, sounded exhausted. We feel unheard, she said bluntly. Your solutions don't address our actual problems. Lyle fumbled for answers. Marcy jumped in with corporate jargon that said nothing. Lauren sighed. We'll be in touch. The call ended abruptly. Lyle slammed his laptop shut, cursing. Nobody noticed me slip out. 10 minutes later, my email pinged. It was from Lauren directly. Brielle, you were on that call. I noticed your name in the notes. You flagged an issue last month that nobody followed up on. Can you elaborate? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, yes. I agonized over my response for an hour. Was I crossing a line? Was this disloyal? But I hadn't stolen anything. I wasn't sharing confidential data. I was offering my professional insight my own company had ignored. I wrote carefully, outlining the framework I'd built. I explained how their workflows could improve, how communication could streamline, how costs could drop by 18%. I attached nothing proprietary, just ideas. Lauren replied within 30 minutes. This is exactly what we've been missing. Can you meet with our board independently? We'd like to explore this further. My heart raced. Independently. That meant outside Summit Consulting. That meant everything was about to change. For the next 3 weeks, I lived 2 lives. By day, I was Invisible Brielle, the woman nobody saw, spoken over in meetings, assigned meaningless busy work. By night, I was someone else. I refined my presentation for Harper Tech until every word shone. I researched industry standards, studied competitor models, and polished 40 slides into perfection. I barely slept. My coffee consumption tripled, but I felt alive for the first time in years. At the office, nothing changed. Lyle dismissed me. Marcy mocked me. Daniel forgot I existed. They had no idea I was building something that would flip their world upside down. And I preferred it that way. Invisibility, I realized, was my greatest weapon. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning. I just printed copies of a routine report when Marcy walked past and, accidentally, bumped into me. Papers exploded across the floor. Coffee from her mug splashed onto my printed pages, ruining them. Oops, she said flatly, not even pausing. Alyssa giggled nearby. I knelt down, gathering soggy papers with shaking hands. Nobody helped. Nobody apologized. I thought about the conference room humiliation, the mocking in the break room, the 3 years of being erased. That evening, I opened a blank document and typed 2 words, resignation letter. But I didn't finish it. Not yet. I had 1 meeting left. 1 chance to rise. Harper Tech's headquarters sat downtown in a sleek glass tower. I arrived 20 minutes early, rehearsing my presentation in the lobby. My palms sweated. My heart hammered. But when I walked into that boardroom and saw 8 executives waiting, something clicked. This was my moment. I began speaking, voice steady and clear. I walked them through the framework, every inefficiency I'd identified, every solution I'd designed. I showed them data, projections, cost savings. I answered questions with precision. And I watched their faces change. Skepticism became interest. Interest became excitement. By the end, the room was silent. Then the chairman leaned forward. Ms. Morgan, he said slowly, we have an offer for you. The contract they offered was life-changing. A 6-figure consulting partnership. Performance bonuses that could double my income. Creative control over strategy. Full recognition as lead consultant. I read the terms twice, hands trembling. This was more than I'd earned in 3 years at Summit Consulting. The chairman smiled. We've been looking for someone who truly understands our needs. You're the first person who's delivered that. Then he asked the question I'd been dreading. Is Summit Consulting involved in this proposal? I met his gaze directly. No, I said. This is entirely independent work. He nodded approvingly. Good. We'd prefer to work with you directly. I signed the contract that afternoon. My life had just changed forever. Walking back into Summit Consulting felt surreal. I moved through the office like a ghost, one last time. My resignation letter sat in my bag, printed and signed. I walked to Lyle's office and knocked. He didn't look up from his computer. What? He snapped. I placed the letter on his desk. He glanced at it, then at me, confused. You're quitting. I nodded. He actually laughed. Good luck finding another job. You won't be missed. I didn't respond. I just walked away, knowing something he didn't. In 3 days, HarperTech would notify Summit Consulting that they were shifting all strategic work to me. And Lyle's world would collapse. For 72 hours, I existed in strange limbo. I'd left Summit Consulting but hadn't started my new role yet. I cleaned my apartment, slept properly for the first time in months, and let myself breathe. On the 3rd day, my phone exploded with notifications. Texts from former coworkers, missed calls from Marcy, an urgent email from Lyle with the subject line, "Call me immediately." I ignored them all. Then I opened the email HarperTech had sent to Summit Consulting, copying me. Effective immediately, all strategic consulting will be handled by Brielle Morgan, independent consultant. We appreciate your past service and wish you well. I smiled. The bomb had dropped, and I wasn't there to see the explosion. The fallout was spectacular. According to texts from a sympathetic coworker, Lyle had stormed through the office screaming. Marcy looked pale and shaken. Daniel kept asking, how did she do this? The partners called an emergency meeting. HarperTech represented 40% of Summit's revenue. Losing them was catastrophic. Lyle tried calling me 6 times. I blocked his number. Marcy sent an email accusing me of stealing the client. I forwarded it to HarperTech's legal team. They responded with a cold, professional message to Summit Consulting, Ms. Morgan did not steal anything. We chose her based on merit. Any further accusations will be addressed by our attorneys. The message was clear. I'd won fairly, and there was nothing they could do. Summit Consulting scrambled desperately. They prepared 3 different proposals trying to win HarperTech back. Each one failed. Without my insights, their strategies were hollow and generic. HarperTech declined every attempt. Meanwhile, Lyle's leadership came under fire. Partners questioned why he'd failed to recognize my talent. Why he'd let their most valuable asset walk away. Someone leaked the story of the conference room humiliation, how Lyle had publicly mocked me after I'd built his quarterly success. The board wasn't pleased. Internal audits began. Revenue projections dropped. Employees started updating their resumes, sensing the company was crumbling. And Lyle, the man who'd erased me, was suddenly fighting for his own survival. 2 months later, I attended the Regional Strategy Summit, the industry's biggest annual conference. I'd been invited as a keynote speaker on innovative consulting models. As I waited backstage, I saw familiar faces in the audience. Lyle sat in the 3rd row, arms crossed. Marcy was beside him, looking uncomfortable. My stomach tightened, but I kept my composure. When my name was announced, I walked on stage to applause. I spoke for 30 minutes about transformation, strategy, and the power of being underestimated. I never mentioned Summit Consulting by name, but everyone in that room knew my story. Afterward, someone approached Lyle during the networking session. "Didn't she used to work for you?" they asked. Lyle's face turned red. The best part wasn't the applause or the recognition. It was the contracts that followed. 3 companies approached me after the conference, asking if I'd consult for them. Word had spread about the Harper tech transformation. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Within 6 weeks, I'd signed 4 new clients. My income tripled. I hired an assistant to manage scheduling. I rented office space downtown, small but elegant, with windows overlooking the river. Everything I'd dreamed of was happening. Meanwhile, Summit Consulting continued its decline. Revenue dropped 28%. 2 senior partners resigned, and Lyle Harper, once untouchable, was quietly asked to leave. Not fired dramatically, just ushered out with a cold handshake and a brief press release about pursuing new opportunities. 6 months after I'd walked out of Summit Consulting, I received an unexpected message. It was from Lyle. I made a mistake, it read. I should have valued your work. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to apologize properly. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part was curious. I agreed to meet for coffee. When Lyle arrived, he looked smaller somehow. Tired. He sat down heavily and said, I underestimated you. Badly. I nodded. You did. He asked if I'd consider coming back to Summit as a partner. We need someone like you, he said desperately. I smiled politely. I appreciate the offer, but I'm building something of my own now. His face fell. I stood to leave. Good luck, Lyle. 1 year after leaving Summit Consulting, Harper Tech offered me something extraordinary. A long-term contract worth more than Lyle's entire annual salary. Plus equity. Plus decision-making authority. They wanted me as their chief strategy officer, a newly created position designed specifically for me. I accepted immediately. My team grew to 12 people. My office expanded. My reputation solidified. Industry publications wrote features about my meteoric rise. From invisible to indispensable, one headline read. I framed it, not out of ego, but as a reminder. A reminder that being underestimated was a gift. That invisibility had protected me while I built something nobody saw coming. That rising quietly was more powerful than shouting for attention. The final twist came 18 months after I'd left Summit. The company declared bankruptcy. Clients had fled, talent had scattered, and leadership had collapsed. The office where I'd spent 3 invisible years was now empty, windows dark. I drove past it one afternoon and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication. Just quiet acceptance. I hadn't destroyed Summit Consulting. They'd destroyed themselves by valuing loudness over competence, by choosing favoritism over merit. I'd simply removed myself from a sinking ship. And in doing so, I'd built something far better. Something mine. Something nobody could take away. That evening, I signed my biggest contract yet, a 7-figure consulting deal spanning 3 years. I'd become exactly what Lyle said I'd never be, essential. My assistant knocked on my office door one morning with an unusual request. There's someone here to see you, she said carefully. She says she used to work with you. I looked up, confused. Alyssa stood in the doorway, looking nervous. She'd been one of the people who mocked me, who laughed when Marcy spilled coffee on my papers. Can I talk to you? She asked quietly. I gestured to a chair. She sat down and took a breath. I wanted to apologize for how we treated you. I didn't realize how wrong it was until everything fell apart. I studied her face. She seemed genuine. Thank you, I said simply. She hesitated. Are you hiring? I thought about it. Then I smiled. Send me your resume. That decision surprised people. Why would I hire someone who'd treated me poorly? But I'd learned something important. People can change. Alyssa had recognized her mistakes. She was talented, just misguided by Summit's toxic culture. I gave her a chance. She became one of my most dedicated team members. That's the thing about rising quietly. You don't need revenge. You don't need to punish people who wronged you. You just build something so undeniable that the contrast speaks for itself. My success wasn't about proving Summit wrong. It was about proving myself right. About showing that competence matters more than visibility. That substance outlasts flash. That being invisible doesn't mean being powerless. It means moving freely while everyone else is distracted. 2 years after walking out of that conference room, I stood in my corner office, looking out over the city. My consulting firm employed 23 people. My contracts spanned 6 companies. My income exceeded anything I'd imagined possible. But the number that mattered most wasn't financial. It was this: 0. 0 people on my team felt invisible. 0 voices went unheard. 0 contributions went unrecognized. I'd built the opposite of Summit Consulting, a place where quiet competence was valued, where credit went to those who earned it, where people could thrive without performing. My phone buzzed. Another client inquiry. Another opportunity. I smiled and answered it. Because when they treated me like I was invisible, they forgot one thing. People rise higher when no one is watching. So, never let people convince you you're invisible. Sometimes being invisible is your greatest advantage, because nobody sees you rising until you're already gone higher.